All right. So hello, I'm Nicholas Greco. So Vice President of Sales at Channel Factory, and with me is Richard Brandolino. Richard, good to see you again. Richard is AdTech leader in the space and specifically leading global media channels over at IBM. It's great to see you. How's everything going?
Doing well, Nico. How are you?
I am doing very well. Um,
Excellent.
yeah, appreciate you joining us today, and thank you for the BI team for setting this up. So yeah, let's just dive into it. Um, so on the subject, I think it's, as this session just wrapped up, going pretty deep into obviously ID resolution and everything. I think it's, pretty exciting. Obviously a lot related to your specific role. Your tenure at IBM really gives you a tremendous amount of experience in this ad tech space and really allowed you to see this, not only see it, but really be a part of this full picture of digital transformation and how that's really impacted the industry. Can you tell us a little bit about, more about your role and some of the work that you've done to transform IBM's media buying efforts, over the years and how that's changed over time?
All right. Well, yeah, I've been with IBM a long time. It started, frankly, in the very early days of digital media, working here. And at IBM, it's probably not been as long as some people might think. But the last 10 or 15 years, we've really gone from essentially ground zero in the digital media space up to, where we're at today. Obviously, before that, we were doing television and a lot of other broadcast sorts of things. But the digital world has really changed things over that time. Started early on, like a lot of other people, doing things like content syndication and webinars and other sorts of things, and primarily focused on our B2B universe, which is where we're at, and have continuously evolved that into the point today where we have a very broad selection of digital media, everything from digital out of home, uh, over the top television, CTV solutions, along with banners and native and social and a very sophisticated search program and everything else along with that. For the last few years, I've spent my time working heavily in developing our programmatic media space and biddable media in general, which has been a really interesting evolution as the universe has sort of evolved really rapidly in that space in the last 5 or 6 years and continues to evolve, which keeps it very interesting and keeps you on your toes on a day-to-day basis.
Always keeps you
Um,
busy. There's always something new happening.
yeah, had a lot of great opportunities though to work with some marvelous people, and while I have been involved in the programmatic, some of the search activities, some of the content syndication, webinars, a variety of other things. I've got to hand it also to the team of folks that I work with, who really make all this stuff happen on a day-to-day basis, whether it's the IBM team, our agency partners, or others. This is a team sport, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I don't know everything, but I work with some really, really smart people who keep me on my toes, and that's great.
No, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. It's a very complicated, ever-changing space, and I think that's probably one of the most exciting things about it is that there's constantly something new to learn every day. But yes, it is on 100% a team sport in this fact. There's no way anybody can take this all on their own. But no, that's great, super helpful. And I guess thought for you on even the media mix portion that you mentioned. How do you guys break that out typically today? Like, how are you thinking about what to assign towards CTV or TV channels or search channels? How are you guys thinking about that today?
Well, we have built some fairly sophisticated models, leveraging IBM technology as well as other technology that we've brought in to help us look at that. We look at um, attribution data, we look at customer interaction data and other sorts of things to help guide us along that way. But we're doing something, that we hadn't done in past years this year, and that is really looking at things brand to demand from the beginning to the end of the funnel, and looking at it by audience. In past years, if you'd have had this conversation with me, what I would have told you is IBM operated by their products, right? Every product team was doing their own thing. Every sub brand in IBM was doing their own thing. Uh, and it worked to an extent, but it also was sort of the antithesis of what we actually wanted to do because it really didn't fulfill our overall brand proposition, which we really want to focus on selling complete solutions to our customer, and knitting together the lots of the little pieces and parts, that not having to have our the individual customers knit them together themselves, right? So we brought our media together in the same sort of way this year, uh, and it's been really interesting to see how that has forced an evolution in the way we attack our channels, because we're able to fully integrate the stuff we're running on TV and CTV, and understand exposure and retargeting, and bringing that all the way down from the television activities down to the banner ads that we're deploying, so that we can look at the full spectrum of reach and frequency and the messages that we're delivering to the users along the way.
Absolutely. And I guess going to the cookieless side of the house, right? And thinking about the future, you know, obviously we have a lot of brands dialed into this right now. So, what are the biggest challenges a brand like IBM, or really any brand, faces when trying to think about how to tackle this new, very privacy-focused world, and a cookie-free future somewhere in the distance, maybe this year, maybe next year, maybe who knows how many years it'll get pushed. But what are some of those big challenges that brands should start thinking about?
Well, I think some of the participants here in the last session were kind of talking about a lot
Yeah,
of it, right? Who do you work with? How do you work with them? Where do you work with them? Not all vendors have reach into every market you're going to want to go and approach. For a company like IBM, who's a big global company, we operate in 170 odd markets around the world, and doing media, not all of them, but a large number of them. Finding a common set of solutions to deploy is really pretty important to us. And that's pretty hard. Frankly, I haven't found anybody that has everything I need in every market. So we've got to start together, knit together different providers that are going to help us accommodate things. And additionally, there are different sorts of requirements in B2B than you have in a B2C universe, right? Um, some of our folks out there, like an Amazon, right? They operate in a very much a registered user sort of environment. They know who's on their site. We don't know who's on our site. So in that case, we're very much like the B2C universe. But we do have a well-established market. We're a mature company. We have a huge database of our existing contacts, our existing customers. Uh, so I really got to deal with the cookieless dimension in three different paths, right? The first is looking at things like the hashed email type solutions, where I'm able to bring in known database. And I've got a huge database and millions of contacts that we've built up and maintained over the last few years. Those are unknown users, right? That we've largely relied in the cookie space for years in order to be able to target and retarget their interactions on our website, which may or may not, by the way, overlap our install base customers, which we know very well.
hmm
And then there's customers that we don't know, right? The cases where we've always been buying third-party data segments and other sorts of things to support ourselves. Um, and I think each of these is going to end up with some different solutions in the marketplace as we continue to evolve. The first, again, you've got hashed email kind of borders. In the second place, you've got some of these universal identifier kind of providers out there, and there's a lot of them right now vying for this space. And then you've got the cohort kinds of solutions. So, Google's got their idea of what a cohort solution looks like, but there are other players in the market who are building cohort-based solutions as well. And we continue to talk with all of them. And I think we're going to probably end up with half a dozen different vendors covering each of these spaces in slightly different ways. And we've got to figure out how to knit that together in a way that actually allows us to accomplish our end goal, which is interacting with that target customer on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, this concept of the universal identifier, that there's still 15 of them, and you have to figure out which one is actually going to work. But 100%, I think it needs to be evaluated by the brand, try to understand what's going to work the hardest for them, what's going to help them reach their customers in the right way, and at the right time with the right messaging. So completely makes sense on that side. And going back to IBM starting off in programmatic, you mentioned you kind of kicked that off with them right from the beginning. So when this kind of all kicked out, was there any thought on future identifiers and things like that, or was this always, we'll use what we have, we'll move forward from there? Was there kind of caution, concern about certain types of data use, or where the future would take you with that?
All right, so there's about 3 or 4 things packed into that
It's a couple.
sentence.
It's a couple.
We'll start with the easy part. No, we had not really contemplated the entire concept of operating in a cookie-free world. We have and have been very, very upfront about privacy, not just as the laws have evolved, right, but as a general principle in IBM. We have been very focused on working with our customers, our prospects, those folks who might become prospects in the future, based on an explicit notice and choice kind of environment. And we've been doing that for as long as I can remember. So we carried that forward, when we came into the media spaces here, right? Do you want to opt into future communications? Do you want to opt into cooking? We keep working on that, and personalization and other sorts of things. And we've continued to evolve that as the laws have evolved, as the technology evolved, as our understanding of people's desires, right, continue to evolve. So that has been a foundational experience all along. Did we know it was coming? We suspected it might be.
Yeah.
Did we know how quickly it was going to take off? No, not at all. So we've just continued to adapt day by day, week by week, but keeping to that core principle of letting the user tell us what do they want to hear from us, when do they want to hear from us, and how do they want to hear from us.
Absolutely. No, super helpful. And again, I think it's extremely important to take what the user's thinking and how they're feeling. And obviously privacy is a big concern right now, and that's why we're leaning so far and far into this. And now, I know a lot of what you do, in your role at IBM right now is very heavily revolved around, evaluating the supply chain, the partners you're working with, operational efficiency, cleaning up the shop, making sure that you're minimizing that kind of AdTech tax that's going on in the world, where there's duplicative work, where there's things like that. And obviously, many other brands that might be listening in right now are thinking about those things too and trying to get better at that. Are there specific things that you look for or that you prioritize? Is it, cookie-free solutions, identity-focused solutions that are kind of leading the pack on that side? Or what are you doing to kind of really think about that and really break out, what's duplicative, what's not? How do I slim this down?
Yeah. It's a complex question, right? And we started looking at the problem from a supply chain and overall supply chain over 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago at this point. A lot of noise was made. Mark Pritchard and his team talking about how much the ad tax was and how much it was eating his dollars, and not fully understanding where his money was getting spent. And our CMO at the time asked the same sort of questions. What are we doing? Where are we spending our money? How are we spending our money? What are we getting for our money? And there weren't a lot of great solutions out there. Right? There were a number of small companies, little startups around the world, who were going to solve the problem in 100 different ways. Log file auditing, blockchain solutions. You can come up with any solution. Somebody had an attempt to go do that. I actually started in IBM in a supply chain group a very, very long time ago. So I looked at the problem and said, very simply, can I apply that basic supply chain discipline that I would apply if I was buying, transistors, nuts, bolts, and screws, other sorts of technology or commodities, right, to the ad space? And the answer was, in large part, yes, we can. Right. So we started by breaking down what the supply chain actually was, what was happening at the various stages of the supply chain, where were we getting this piece from, what was each provider bringing to the fold, what was their value to us, and start crawling through that. Along the way, we found a couple of things. Right? In addition to being able to look at how we control cost, from the direct suppliers, there was also this huge element of fraud in the marketplace. years ago. It's still out there, but in decreasing levels in most markets around the world. How do we get fraud out of our systems? And a lot of the fraud actually was linked to where you were buying your ad space. So by narrowing down the supplier base to those folks that we knew we could trust, we very quickly cut out a big chunk of fraud, which was an expensive piece of the overall puzzle, right? You went from 10% ad fraud to less than 1% ad fraud in just a matter of about 18 months because we trimmed down those suppliers that weren't safe for us to be working with, right? And we started digging into the other places as well. What are we paying the agency fees? What are we paying to our DSPs? How many SSPs are we working with? Are we working with the SSPs because they have the right customers? Or are we working with SSPs because they have the right price? Or are we working with SSPs because this, because that? And start peeling that whole onion back a layer at a time until we got a real good handle on what's going on. In the process of doing that, we went from 40% or so of our ad spend going to tech, most of it that we didn't understand, to under 25% today, which is a huge jump, right? It's free money, allows us to reinvest that money and do things more efficiently, or conversely, pay for better quality content, right? Our goal wasn't to take money out of our budget. Our goal was to actually put more money into quality content that was going to reach the consumer. And we made big progress on that one. Now, as privacy starts to come into it, it's sort of changed the equation a little bit because now we have an additional set of suppliers that we need to bring in order to provide the services that we're looking for, to be able to identify and interact with these customers. Some of them are very inexpensive. Some of them are very, very expensive. So you got to continuously walk the line between making sure that you're able to achieve your goals with a reasonable expenditure or not, right? And you could easily get back up from 25% to 40% overhead just by spending on various platform and identity based kind of solutions to help you drive your goals forward. I don't think anybody wants to go back that far, at least around here.
No, I don't think so. But even I guess thinking about that from a, as a marketer that prioritizes efficiency on that standpoint, surrounding identity, are there any things that specifically have stood out from partners that you think are kind of leading the pack on that front when you're thinking about, optimizing towards efficiency?
Well, I think the big thing for us is making sure that the partner has the reach that we're looking for, right? And we talked about trimming our supply chain. We went in programmatic, we went to an allow list model years ago, probably before most people had really considered it as viable. So, when we talk to vendors, one of the things we always talk about is what percentage of our audiences do you cover by market, right? Out of our top, let's say 5,000 vendors, 5,000 websites that we work with, what does your coverage look like? And what does your coverage look like by market? Right. And then the next question you start getting into is, how does your environment work in a B2B space? So if you're looking at hashed email kind of borders, and there's a lot of them out there today, most are built on data that they're acquiring from various consumer environments, telephone records, other sorts of things like that, which are great in a consumer space, but there are very few people out there who really surface their business email address in a wide variety of places. So your ability to penetrate into that market is much tougher. And you've got to start looking at, very specifically, how are they going to cover your customers, and how does that vary by market within their customers? Because they too are under restrictions through GDPR and CCPA and all these laws around the world that prohibit them from just grabbing data for more they want and building a graph. So you start getting into a lot of questions, and some of them do get pretty technical pretty quickly. And then you get to the third set of questions like, so what are you actually doing with the data behind the covers, right? Just because I have data and my customers have given me data doesn't mean I want to share it with the entire universe. I don't, right? I'm trying to respect their privacy, as I said earlier. So you want to make sure that the people who are processing the data are processing the data in a way that is compatible with the way we want to do business, not necessarily what's the easiest for them. So it's a multi-layer sort of story that you've got to fight your way through.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the B2B world makes it a little bit more complicated too. So lots of fun that comes with that. So, another thought is, solutions surrounding contextual based targeting have been a very large part of the conversation lately, especially with everything going on specific to privacy, specific to identity, and how we have to be cautious with that. And, as you know, this allows you to really hone in on the right content that the ideal audience will be viewing without the need or reliance on those identifiers or those cookies, because we're focusing on the context, right? So at Channel Factory, contextual is obviously a massive part of our offering, and we often run analysis for our clients and find that misaligned content that brands are running on is actually significantly higher than they expect it to be. They know there's some level of misalignment, but it is typically significantly higher, which does actually eat into those working media dollars that you mentioned before. When cutting out fraud and things like that, the way we look at it doesn't necessarily have to be fraud. It could be something that's just misaligned and maybe incorrect type of content. Curious to know how you think about that. Whereas dollars appear as efficient, but maybe they're not, depending on the type of content that something is in front of. So where do you at IBM find the right balance between surrounding the right content, but also driving the lowest cost? Obviously, those are two things that become a little bit challenging, like you mentioned before. Being in front of that premium content, you want to be there, but obviously it does come at a premium cost. So trying to find that balance is extremely important to a brand.
Yeah, and it's again, it's a balancing act, right? We do leverage contextual heavily in our advertising because it tends to get us in front of the right people. Often we combine that information with other sets of data that we have to get even better. One of the key things for us has been a heavy investment in both SEO and SEM, right? And making sure that we're on the right topics and the right content on our website. Now, the reason I bring that up is because the things that help me find the right people and get that right context in our website is also the things that help us leverage contextual advertising and make it the most effective. Because if I understand the language that's being used by the user to describe their particular problem, whether it's Google or Bing or any of the other vendors around the world where we advertise for search, I can take that same set of data and apply it back into my contextual targeting. We build custom segments almost for everything we do. Very little is a commercial off-the-shelf kind of segment data. So that SEM data combined with the SEO data, combined with those custom segments from a number of different providers. We work with different providers. Everybody has different strengths, good or bad, and it helps us. It helps us a lot find that right audience. There are some newer vendors out there that are starting to offer contextual targeting services for things like CTV, which is an amazing thought. They're using some incredible AI systems to understand the contextual language and the other things that are going on within that television program, and we're allowed to start applying contextual targeting to video, which is just a huge increase for us. So yeah, contextual is definitely a major pillar for us. Frankly, it performs substantially better than any third-party segment we've ever bought. Oh yeah, and it's cheap, right? Relatively speaking. So it's a great thing. And if I can combine that effective targeting with the identifiers that we're able to get that allow us to target not just cookieless, right, but to target cookieless users that exist today, like those fine friends of us using Apple products. I'm able to get even cheaper CPM rates because there's very few people bidding on that traffic from Safari right now.
Yeah, 100%. I think, again, to your point, using that set of combined identifiers with contextuals, that is kind of the sweet spot, especially as video continues to unlock in that space. So definitely very, very exciting on that front. And now I know you recently worked with the ANA on the Programmatic Transparency Playbook, which is really exciting. I don't know if you can tell us a little bit about some of the findings within that report and kind of what that means for marketers.
Yeah. Well, we talked about it a little bit, right? So
Yeah.
when I talked about the work that I had done with IBM and how we will attack the supply chain, a lot of that got reflected into the report that the ANA did. But what we've done is kind of taken it from Rich's process to something that we think is much more repeatable for a CMO or other senior marketing leader, both companies large and small. How to think about taking apart your supply chain, right? How to identify your supply chain. Most marketers don't even think about their supply chain as a supply chain. So getting the concept out there, breaking the various elements down so that they can, turn it into a task list and a to-do list for their community, their teams, to go start looking at where the cost is, what's the overlap, what's the value at this point, what's the value at that point, and making some conscious decisions about what quality is actually needed at the various places in the chain.
Mm-hmm.
Most people will spend a lot of money making sure that their ads are brand safe, which is fantastic. Do they spend as much money as they need to making sure that it's not only brand safe, right, but it's brand effective? So, the supply chain, by the way, is not just the outside, right? It's also your inside organization, the copy, the content, the way you're building ads, the way you're deploying ads, how effectively and efficiently you're able to deploy those ads in the market. Somebody said to me a long time ago, the best ad in the world is useless if it's sitting on a shelf someplace, right? So, your goal has to be not just to find the right place, not just to find the right customer, to get it out there in the market as effectively and as efficiently and as quickly as you can to take advantage of whatever the sweet point in the market happens to be this week, because next week it's going to probably be something slightly different.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. Constantly changing. But no, thanks for those kind of tidbits into that. And again, I do know we covered some of that, which is great. But obviously with the delay of cookie deprecation, again, I know we've all heard it a few different times over the years. As you start to think about this more and more, is that kind of is IBM under the mentality of use them while you got them and go from there? Are you still full steam ahead on identity, focused solutions, or does this slow down? Because I feel like that's kind of one of the things that we've seen every time it gets announced that it's happening. Panic mode, everybody freaks out for a couple of months, and then it slows down. And then as soon as we get the notification about a delay, everyone's like, all right, we'll worry about it in 6 months from now.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on there. I've heard it from other places as well. We've sort of looked at it as not a reprieve, but maybe a delay of execution.
Yeah.
The day is coming, right? The consumer world and the privacy regulators around the globe have made that very clear that this day is eventually going to end. But it's also not delayed, right? So if you take it back and you step back a second, you look at Apple and their browsers and Firefox together, that's almost 40% of the market share in North America.
Yeah.
And they don't do cookies. So while we all worry about what Google is going to do with their Chrome browser, you're already working with 60% of your possible audience. And the second and third tier browser markers, they're coming on quickly as well. So that 40% that you can't touch today, maybe 45, maybe 50% before Chrome ever gets to the point of fully deprecating a third-party cookie. So the delay hasn't really bought us any time. It's just moved the finality, the stake is in the ground and this beast is dead date So yeah, so we haven't
Yeah.
slowed down. We're continuing to work forward. We know it's going to continue to be an evolution. We know it's going to continue to the inevitable conclusion. I guess the real question is going to become, what is that final date? And I don't know that it matters to me because I've
And I
got to
think
be ready for it
that's
today, whether it's today, tomorrow, or a year from now. I've got to be ready for it.
exactly. I think that kind of fear has kind of dwindled over time because people have accepted, we're already doing this on some level. We're slowly doing it more and more and more. And I think it's almost easier now to just rip the Band-Aid off and kind
Yeah,
of
exactly.
get it over with. So I think
Exactly.
most
So,
people are
I'll
already
keep those
halfway there.
I'll keep those third-party cookies and I'll keep using them as long as I can.
Yeah,
But, I don't want to be completely dependent on them because I can't be anymore. I haven't been able to be
absolutely.
dependent on them for a while.
Exactly. Yeah, the only way forward is to think about strategies with and without them, and without the guarantee that they're going to be there next year. So I guess on that note, where do you? I think we're again finally getting to this point. Like, where do you feel that we'll actually be on the situation over the next 2 to 3 years? I think that's really kind of the closing point of that. I don't know what your thoughts on realistically where we're going to be with identity and universal identifiers and where we stand with that.
Well, I think there's an awful lot that's still going to happen. A lot of
Yeah.
evolution that's going to happen. I don't know when Google will finally pull the plug on their products. Um, Compound that with the pressure they're getting from regulators in some of the markets. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
But it is pretty clear that we're coming to an end. And along that way, I think it's going to be really important to all of the vendors in this space and all the advertisers in this space to really adopt the mindset that privacy is number one concern, or a number one concern anyway, for the people we're trying to sell to, the regulators we have to deal with, and frankly, our bosses. Nobody wants to be on the end of a letter from some regulator in the world that can make your day really, really bad. So we've got to keep all that in mind as we're building this out, as we're looking at these vendors, whether they're universal ID to vendor or HEMS or somebody else doing cohort kinds of things. It's really important to examine what they're doing with the data you've got, your customers' data, how they're processing it. Are they doing it in a way that is going to be safe for you? Because if they find themselves in trouble with a regulator, you have trouble. So you need to understand what they're doing. You understand how they're processing the data. You understand if they're merging data, where they're merging data, how they're going to use that data, whether it's the data you gave them, data they've captured from other places. At the end of the day, we're going to have to be a little bit of a privacy cop on our own,
Yeah.
To try to stay a step ahead of what the inevitable conclusion is, right, from the regulatory communities, especially in Europe and now more frequently in North America with all the laws that are being passed here in the last few months. But Brazil and other markets around the world that are adopting similar laws. We just got to be really, really, really cognizant of what's happening to that data, and we'll evolve from there.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. That is super helpful to have that insight. And I guess one last question. I see Kristen joining in. And I guess before I ask that, if anyone has any other questions, I know we have a couple minutes left. If you want to throw anything in the chat, feel free to do so. But just one question related to IBM and some of the technology obviously at hand, like Watson, all the AI tools, all the solutions that IBM is constantly developing, incredible technology. How are you and the team kind of leveraging some of IBM's own built technology when thinking about your own marketing efforts or your own advertising efforts?
Well, there's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes. Some parts of it get commercialized through our Watson advertising organization. But a lot of the stuff that we're doing is based on analyzing the data that we've got. We have, for example, our own market attribution-based system that has machine learning and Watson-based technology sitting in it to help us understand the value of every touch that we're making to a customer. We've got other sorts of data that we've used in various places to help us refine our audience work as we're deploying it in programmatic. We've got an ongoing set of analysis going on around our install base customers to try to understand where they're likely to go and how we can meet them when they get there. What are the problems they're dealing with based on data that we can see out in the web, right? People come to us and interact with us through the online environment. We can build and understand patterns of their data and help our sales teams understand the patterns that we're seeing in this millions of transactions a day that we're dealing with. And we can alert our salespeople, right? Here's what's going on in your territory with your customers, right? They're exploring solutions in this space, in this space, in this space. Are you talking to them about that? If you're not, you need to be, right? Now, I used to be a salesman a long time ago, and I got to tell you, in my day, I would have killed for that information. Right? It is unbelievably valuable to a salesperson to have some idea of what's being researched at a company before they even get to the point of offering RFIs or RFPs, or maybe it's a research project happening in a corner someplace, within a very large organization. But those things have a habit of sort of helping you lose control of your account if you don't know about them. So the more we see, the more we can know, and the more we can get to the salespeople, the smarter they can be, and they can pick or choose how they engage with the customers on those topics and stay ahead of the customer.
Absolutely.
And the customers do seem to like it.
They do. That's good. I'm gonna have to figure out how you share some of that sales data with us. Need some of that for my sales team, which would be great.
There you go. Maybe at some point we'll commercialize it. I don't know. I don't deal with the product development folks all that much.
Got it. No, super helpful and appreciate that. I don't see any questions in the chat, and I do believe we're at time. So Richard, thank you so much for letting me pick your brain for a few minutes on all this. Anything else you want to leave kind of the audience with right now?
No, just thank you all for taking the time to come listen to me today. Hopefully it's been of some value to you. And feel free to reach out if you have other questions. I'll be happy to chat with you.
Thank you both so much. Really appreciate it.